So I did it. I finished Warbreaker. For those of you who are joining me just now, the books that I've read in the Cosmere are Warbreaker, as of about 20 minutes ago. And then I've also read the Mistborn trilogy and Secret History as well. And before this video, I had about 150 pages left of Warbreaker. And I made some bold predictions as to what I thought was going to happen. So what I'm going to do is go back through those predictions and talk about what did and didn't happen and how far away I was and how awesome the ending of this book was as a whole as well. So let's jump into it. So throughout the course of reading this book, I made tons of predictions, and I'm not going to go through every single one, but here are the main big ones I made before getting to this final section. And the first one, I made a prediction that Susebron, so the God King, would give up his life for Ciri or Vivenna and make them the God Queen. So did that happen? No, it didn't. But I feel like it was a good idea. It was a decent prediction. What we got, instead of Susebron giving up all of his breaths and giving them away and turning somebody else into the God King or God Queen, because when I made that prediction, I still thought the priests were trying to kill Susebron or try and kill the God King. So I thought that he was going to have to give up his breaths in some way or another to get them out of him in a way that he wanted, rather than the priests killing him. But it turns out none of that was true, and we'll get to that in a minute. It was somebody else who was trying to kill the God King, and the priests were on his side. So what we got, instead of the God King sacrificing himself for somebody else, was we got our MVP of the book, in my opinion, Lightsong, giving up his godhood for the God King himself, which was oh so sweeter than what I predicted. But not before getting some incredible scenes between his high priest, I think it's Larimar, and Lightsong himself. And we get the big reveal of how he died to save Larimar, who's his brother's child, so his niece. We also got Larimar completely losing his temper with Lightsong before that, which he's obviously been holding on to for a really long time. We got Lightsong's realization that he in fact is a god, and that was the opposite of the message for the entirety of the book. And by him realizing that he was a god and then doing what a god should, what we think a god should do anyway, which is laying down their life and giving it all for somebody else, he actually creates a god in the God King, which is wild. It's probably quite philosophical if you stop and think about it, but overall it was just really enjoyable writing and a spectacular end that, although I had some parts correct, I didn't have guessed, which is always fun. That's why we read. You want to be surprised, and you want to be astounded, and you want to be just impressed, I suppose, and I can't say that I'm not. And I can't move on from this point without just completely expressing my love for Lightsong and this storyline. Going from apathetic person who doesn't believe he's a god and is lazy and doing the absolute minimum and has everything, like you don't see that very often. That's not like a regular trope that I've seen on a regular basis. And then to go from that to proper godhood and getting right stuck into the entirety of the storyline, and then really just being instrumental, like it's not something that you see on a regular basis, and therefore I absolutely loved it. The uniqueness of his storyline, and also his character, like his dialogue was so good. His dialogue was witty, it was fun to read. It was kind of like something out of Ocean's 11 or a Guy Ritchie movie, where the dialogue itself is super entertaining, and that's enough to pull you through the scenes and get you excited just to hear him even think or talk to somebody else. So my MVP for this book was Lightsong, probably by a very long way. My next guess going into the end of the book was that Nightblood was a person. I kind of guessed that one. So we find out that the scholars are who indeed I thought they were. That's one of my better guesses from when I identified who Drifter was, and he was telling the story of the scholars, and I said that Vasha, Demph, those guys had something to do with the scholars. And that turns out I was right, which is super good, very rewarded. It's nice to get some right after getting so many wrong. Turns out Nightblood was created by, and I can't remember her name, I think it's Shashara, which is Dent's sister, who was another one of the scholars. And they all learned how to create something or do something that made them extremely dangerous people. And Shashara figured out how to, and there was 4 tiers, and we got an info dump right near the end, and that was cool. I much preferred the info dump being at the end rather than right at the start. And Miss one, it was right at the start. There were several right at the start, but in this one it was near the end, and it kept an air of mystery, and there was a lot of mystery still when the book was finished. But I digress. So Nightblood kind of is sentient. Well, he is sentient. He's awakened steel, and he's really scary. Like when Vasha had to draw Nightblood, and we could see Nightblood just sucking the breaths and the color from Vasha, and he was close to losing it all. That was crazy, and I will never get bored of the literal way that Nightblood talks, and how he would enchant people and really take them over with desire and have them kill each other, all without ever being drawn. He was basically just thrown around as a sword in a sheath, which when you're imagining those battles and those fights, it was so much fun. And speaking of the scholars, I'm sure we must get more, because Vasha, really interesting character, and their history would be interesting as well, even though I feel like we did get like a relatively good scope of what they've not necessarily been up to, but like who they were. I don't know if we're going to find out more about their past. I would definitely be up for it, but I would be very surprised if they don't include the God King and Ciri, and then Vivenna and Vasha or Khalad or Peacebringer or Peacegiver. I'd have to look at my notes for that one. In the future, because they were really good characters and I enjoyed all of them, and I would be sad if we didn't get to revisit this world or have them visit a different world, because that's how it feels the Cosmere goes. If you're powerful enough, you pop up on a few different worlds. My third prediction was that the Idrians, and especially the Idrian King, would have much more to do with the war than we first thought, and I was a mile off. And this is just great Brandon Sanderson writing. What he does is he lines up everything so you feel like you're coming to a logical conclusion, and it was a logical conclusion, and then he very sneakily brings you to that logical conclusion, but one of the key components has completely changed, and that would be the Pan Khal. I think that's how you pronounce them in this book. I didn't for 1 second think that they would be involved as a race and as a nation, as a player in this book, and that's just great writing. Like, what else can I say? He did it intentionally, like the way Bluefinger fooled Ciri, like he fooled me as well, and it was just impressive. Never for 1 second did I think that they were going to be the driving force. So well done, Brandon Sanderson. And he does it every book. There's always at least one storyline where the conclusion makes so much sense, it's so obvious for you to see the entire time, and yet he writes it in a way where you don't see it. So again, that's why we read. Very well done. Really enjoyed that part of the story coming to an end. My next guess was that Blushweaver had evil intentions, and I'm not completely wrong in this. Like, she was working with the priests and she did want to take much more control of what was going on. Doesn't necessarily mean she was evil. And the priests, if I've understood it correctly, were actually the Pan Khal. They had manipulated her. So I felt sad. I felt like I'd misjudged her. And honestly, her death was absolutely brutal. It was brutal, efficient, out of nowhere. And although I didn't think that Blushweaver was an amazing character, seeing the death through Lightsong's eyes and having to feel his pain and his regret and his despair was, you know, it was good in the sense that you feel the emotions with him as well. It really showed the depth of the connection that he felt with Blushweaver, even though he played it coy and he played it in a way that you wouldn't think that even throughout the course of the book, even though we read it from his perspective a lot. So I apologize to Blushweaver and Blushweaver fans. I misjudged her, but I think it's you know, it's fair. It was a fair thing to do, the way the story was told, and turns out she wasn't evil. And I feel like I should definitely talk about the priests as well. So I fell for that hook, line and sinker. I thought the priests were against the God King and against Ciri and were pushing the war. But turns out they weren't. They were just trying to look after the God King and the lineage and the breath and all of that. And the scene where they're all trying to defend, well, basically they're just sacrificing themselves because they're getting mowed down by the Lifeless to stop the God King being hurt, was quite touching, I suppose. It shows the depth of their commitment and faith to the God King. So well done to the priests, even though overall they did a terrible job. My final prediction was that Ciri or Vivenna, one of them would become returned. And what I really like about this book is that I still don't know what makes somebody a return. I know that's not true. I know what makes them a return with regards to the breath that occurs inside of them, but how do they get chosen and why do they get chosen and who decides? I feel like that may have something to do with the shard, because somebody mentions like a cool and calm voice telling them or asking them something along those lines. I think it's maybe Lightsong asking them if they want to become a returned, or maybe it was Vasha. So yeah, like I like when there's a bit of mystery in a book. Mistborn, incredible series, but it was so cut and dry, and although there's questions still to be answered, there's a lot. I just felt like this one allowed me to live in the dark a lot more with regards to the magic systems and how it all tied together, and it wasn't as logical as the Mistborn was. So I also predicted with that the hair was going to be more important than we thought. The hair and the color changing and the hair length changing that the girls had, and it turns out that was really important because that means they were descended from like one of the original Returned, if I'm not mistaken. And also, I don't think it was addressed at any point, but Denth, when Denth died, his hair changed color and length as well, meaning that he was descended maybe from the same people. I don't know. He's so old. Could he possibly be like a great grandfather of Ciri and Vivenna? I don't know. That would be interesting. I doubt it. But maybe though, who knows? So it's nice that there's still a lot of unanswered questions here. But yeah, I don't know how a returned is selected. So that's cool. I liked that a lot. And I feel like that mystery component really compels me, whereas I know other people want answers, not necessarily straight away, but by the end of the book. And I quite like that there's an encaptured story that doesn't give me all the answers. So overall, what did I think? I thought this was the best book in the Cosmere that I've read so far, and I haven't read that many. I'm sure some of you have read, all of them that are out. But out of the 5 books now that I've read, this was my favorite by a country mile. And there's a few reasons. Number one, I thought the characters were more just well formed when I met them, and although they go through turbulent times and they grow and they change, I just felt like they were less stereotypical. Ciri and Susibron's relationship, that was interesting. That's not something that happens on a regular basis, having the most powerful figure be, basically a child and need to try to understand the world around them. And that comes from a child as well who comes in there and they're trying to plot from the inside out. Like, that was a great dynamic. Vivenna was a cool character. I didn't enjoy her storyline as much as Ciri's, but it did get much more interesting once Vasha was involved and it started to quicken and we learned more about these scholars and more about the world around us, and the mercenaries, showed their true colors. That was interesting. Lightsong's storyline was incredible. I loved it. I want to mention the dialogue again. Like, I love that type of dialogue, and I don't normally think that Sanderson has amazing dialogue. It's adequate, it's interesting most of the time, but it's relatively basic. And this dialogue from Lightsong is the best of his that I've read by a long way. I really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure if Sanderson was like capable of that kind of enchanting dialogue, but of course he is, and I'm sure there's much more to come from him as he, I would guess he changes his style throughout the course of the Cosmere. Like, it's probably took him a long time to write all of these books. I'm sure some were much earlier than others and things changed. So I'm hoping that this is a good sign for things to come. Not that I haven't enjoyed his dialogue in the other books. Like I said, it's good, it's adequate, it's something that I don't dislike reading, but there's other authors who do dialogue with much more poetry and much more, I don't know, it just captures you and you can enjoy the conversations. While with Sanderson, sometimes with the dialogue, I feel like it's just a means to an end because he's such an efficient writer. There has to be a trade-off somewhere. But anyway, absolutely loved this book. You tell me, when you read this one, did it go straight to number 1 on your list? Did you read this, I don't know, maybe you read this first, so it would be automatically number 1 on your list. But if you've read a lot more of them, does it still stay high on your list as well? I'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts on Warbreaker. And the question I normally answer next is, well, what am I going to read next? I think I was looking, so I did purchase this, right? So it's the first 3 in the series that everybody has recommended, the Stormlight Archive, and they're chunky books. They're big. There's a lot to read there, and I am excited to read those. But my first plan was to pick that up and to go straight into it. However, and I'm actually going to do a video about this maybe next, I've been reading new books for about 2 years in a row, and as I was going to open up this 3-pack and start reading them, my heart I looked at the bookshelf behind me, and my heart just called out and it said, you need to go and reread some books. I spent years of my life just rereading the series that I loved inside and out. And I probably will do a video on this because I'm the biggest advocate for rereading books, and it's been so long since I have. So I am going to get to these books here because I'm excited to and I want to, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time just rereading some books from when, just from before, because they're so cozy and it's just an enjoyable thing to do. So I will be back with these new ones, but I'm going to have a video or 2 in between. And I don't know how I'm going to do videos on books that I've read if I'm rereading them, but I will find a way and I will post them, and hopefully you guys enjoy them. So I will see you next Sunday at 10 a.m. Central Time. Thank you very much.